Hello, and welcome to our weekly live dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's August 16th, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. If you have questions and comments for Helga, you can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them in the chat box. Helga, we have a series of events occurring which are portending a major change in the world as part of an ongoing process. There's the BRICS conference, which is coming up next week in South Africa, with many nations beyond the BRICS members participating. And there's a conference ongoing in Moscow today titled Global Security Realities in a Multipolar World, which has more than 70 nations participating and is providing a glimpse of what we might expect next week at the BRICS summit. So there's an ongoing effort at the same time from the so-called Western nations to sabotage the fight to end colonialism. What can you tell us about how this battle is shaping up?
Well, I think the establishments in the West are so far refusing to recognize that their policies have caused a boomerang to occur, or these policies boomeranged, and there was a tremendous blowback because the sanctions policy against Russia has not hurt Russia. It has hurt especially Europe and there especially Germany. The confiscation of assets has led to a de-dollarization, and the general geopolitical policies have led now to a situation where China and Russia are in a cemented strategic partnership, which all efforts to try to divide will fail. And you have an absolute, major strategic revolt, one can say, from the side of the developing countries who absolutely don't want to be under the yoke of colonialism anymore. So, I think that the best image I could come up with to, give it all a metaphor is the fact that when Foreign Minister Baerbock tried to fly into the Indo-Pacific, she had to return with her plane 2 times because of a technical failure, supposedly, of the plane. And the plane had to put a lot of kerosene into the ocean to be able to land again so shortly after take-up. Then she had to cancel her entire visit, and obviously the opportunity to send nice pictures home for the credulous failed completely. And there were many comments in the international media, some of them quite schadenfroh, basically saying this is typical for German politics these days. They can't get anything done anymore. And there is something to it, because if you look at all the many failures of infrastructure, of punctuality of the trains, and I could make a very long list, it is the failure of a wrong policy, especially the green policy, which now is leading to the destruction of Germany. This image of Baerbock not being able to fly to the Indo-Pacific is sort of the synonym where things stand. And, people in the West, I'm not talking about the establishments, I'm talking about the people, the populations, they have to recognize that there are changes which cannot be remedied by going back to the old ways. One is that, the result of all of these policies of eastward expansion of NATO over 30 years and all the subsequent developments which happened has led to a situation where it's very obvious that Russia has made a decision that they are no longer counting on politicians in the West. They're no longer trying to, somehow find people in Europe, the United States, for sure not, to have a peaceful policy. or to have a policy of disarmament and somehow trying to solve problems through diplomacy. And they are now reorientating. I think the relationship between Russia and China is one thing. There are some people in Europe who still are trying to either appeal to Russia or to China with the intent to get them to cut the relationship between Russia and China. I think this is absolutely condemned to fail. It completely misestimates the resolve of these two countries who have drawn their conclusions out of Western policies. And it has completely backfired also in respect to the policy of the developing countries who, because of the Chinese option of cooperating with the Belt and Road Initiative for the last 10 years, have now seen for the first time to have an alternative to the neoliberal system, which basically put them into a situation where they could not overcome their dependency on Western credits, which had conditionalities attached to them, which basically prohibited any real industrial development of the developing countries. So they have basically drawn the conclusion. And, if you listen to all of these speeches from Africa, from the development of the Sahel zone, Niger, Chad, Burkina Faso, Algeria, South Africa, Zimbabwe, you get a completely new tone where it is very clear that they are saying openly, we had it with your colonial policies. Now, there was just a week ago or so, the Russia-African Summit in St. Petersburg, where our Schiller Institute representative from France, who is the head of the Africa desk, basically was the only Western representative who was invited to the summit. And he made an absolutely fantastic report about it. You should go on our website and look at this, and you can retweet it and resend it in any possible ways, because people have to know that that is the new spirit of the global South. So I think, I think these things cannot be reversed. I don't think you can go back to the old geopolitical game. I think the only way out would be that enough people in Western Europe and the United States understand that they have to move to cooperate with the global majority. That means a new paradigm, a new concept of international relations, which regards every country as an equal, which respects the sovereignty of all, which goes for a mutual win-win policy in the interest of everybody. And that will be a new experience for some of the people who still have been used to think in the old colonial ways. But it's a very hopeful development for mankind as a whole. And the more quickly we can get, at least some portions of the establishments in North America and Europe to recognize that, the better, because the continuation of trying to, stick to geopolitical aims can only lead to the demise of the West. And that is unfortunately an option also, because if Europe does not find a way to cooperate with the global South, Germany right now is about to crash against the wall and become completely deindustrialized with unbelievable social consequences. So we are really at a epochal change, but of a quite different way than Chancellor Scholz talked about more than a year ago, because it is the transition from the colonial age to the modern age, where colonialism will be a question of the past.
One of the leading fronts of this battle is taking place in Africa around the coup that occurred in Niger. Our associate Jacques Cheminade, a former presidential candidate in France, put out a statement on the attempt by the French and other Western countries to interfere in the situation there Jacques called for France to stop its neo-colonial interference in Niger and to move for a dissolution of NATO. Now, given the sharp negative response from African nations to France, US, to ECOWAS, and others who are making threats against Niger, is it possible, in light of what you just said, that Cheminad's proposal will get some support?
Well, I think so. I mean, it does not look like it right now, but there is clearly part of the French, I would say, even establishment. If you think, for example, that the military is belonging to the establishment, I think that there are many people who absolutely think like de Gaulle, that to be in NATO is absolutely not compatible with the preservance of French national interest. That's a big factor. It's I think it's strongest in France of any European country, because they have the tradition of de Gaulle, who after all left NATO. Then secondly, I think that there is a phenomena which in France is also stronger than in any other European country, and that is the phenomena of sovereignists. These are people of very different political shades and colors, but they all are basically convinced that the sovereignty of France is what is absolutely crucial, and they see that threatened by NATO and by the EU. So I think, given the fact that the present policies of the French government of Macron is, one of militarization of the economy combined with brutal austerity, which hits the poorest part of the population. I think France, like any other European country, is becoming more and more a social explosive entity, and that is a big factor as well. So, given the fact that the Schiller Institute and the Solidarité et Progrès party of Jacques Cheminade are also respected voices inside France, I think that there is a hope that we can, show the way into a different direction. It will take a lot of work and a lot of courage, but I'm actually optimistic that we can do it.
Okay, I'm back on.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we had a slight interruption there. Are you ready for the next question, Helga?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we had someone write in on the BRICS currency question. There's a lot of speculation. Will they come up with a new currency or not? And Greg asks, how can the BRICS work out the valuations for commodities from different countries? Will they use valuations in gold, or what do you think about that?
Well, my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, wrote a very important conceptual paper about that question many years ago called Trade Without Currency. And there he actually proposes that a new currency should be created based on commodities and values of physical economy. What that means is that you will have to have a clearance institution among national currencies and then you have to you agree on a certain standard of price setting for gold and other commodities, fixed exchange rates, and then you value the productivity of labor as a key factor in the situation. So then there needs to be adjustments from time to time, but as long as the vector of development is in the direction of an increase in the productivity through investments in those technologies which lead to an increase in the energy flux density and the related relative potential population density, you can adjust this. Now, this is a very important measurement because not every new technology is doing that. For example, green technologies may look attractive to the speculators because they can create bubbles for a short period of time, but they're actually decreasing the productivity of the labor and also the productive capacities, and they go in the direction of lowering the potential population density. So these are things which can be absolutely scientifically measured. And I think that this correlation between the energy flux density and the population density is something which will have to be exactly figured out. And, obviously, this is in discussion right now very acutely.
Okay, now we have a question from Agneta from the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. Her group is very much concerned with ending the arms race, and she asks, will you take on space warfare? What's your view of space warfare?
Well, I think space warfare is even more perverse than warfare on Earth, because space is really the area where the next phase of human development should occur, namely that we overcome the geopolitical confrontation and the idea that you have to put out your stake on the moon and this part is mine and I will defend this with weapons. Naturally, space war is already a factor. You have basically the control of almost every kind of warfare from space on Earth already right now, and that is shortening the warning time to even less time than you have it on Earth. So it is very important to include space weapons and the use of space for military purpose into a new disarmament agreement. But I think more important philosophically is that space must become the area of cooperation of the human species. It's that which makes us human. If you think about the fact that, since actually Apollo, I think it was Apollo 9, I'm not quite sure, the first time when man was able to lift from the Earth. This was a huge breakthrough. In many astronauts think that this was even a greater breakthrough than the Apollo landing on the moon, because it meant that mankind could started to stop to be only earthlings, that we could indeed lift ourselves into space. And that was the first baby step, so to speak, of mankind becoming a space species. And now in a few days we will have several moon landings. I think a Russian one and I think an Indian one just shortly before the BRICS summit. Soft landings on the south pole of the moon. There are very concrete plans of several space agencies to build a village on the moon, and that should be where nations peacefully collaborate to make the next step in terms of conquering and finding out about the laws of the universe. And that's what human beings should do. So I think this is very high on the agenda.
Okay, let's shift the subject for a moment to U.S. politics, because there have been some developments there with the fourth round of indictments against Donald Trump. Several people have asked about these indictments, and the general theme is doesn't this look like overkill? Isn't this going to backfire on the people who are going after Trump through the courts?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty sure it will because, when the election took place, there were many people who were convinced that there was some tampering with the election. Now, because of the whole developments, January 6th, and people have been pretty much intimidated to take these issues up. But Trump is way, way ahead in the lead of the Republicans, and you have now with Robert Kennedy Jr. on the Democratic side, you have a non-establishment candidate on the Democratic side. So I think the political landscape in the United States is very much different than it was during the last election, and it becomes unpredictable. I think that the Biden administration is extremely concerned, and not only Biden, the administration, but the Atlanticists in Europe are quite freaked out about the possibility that either Trump or Kennedy could win the election, and that would be, in their view, an end to their entire design. Naturally, this is very far away, and the changes which I talked about before are already creating a completely different situation. So I think, the short answer to your question is yes, I think it has the potential of completely backlashing against the present policies.
Now we have a question from AJ from the chat room, which goes back to what you were talking about earlier, but he asks, whatever happened to diplomacy in the world? What is the responsibility of diplomats?
Well, I think diplomats have to reinvent diplomacy because, it has basically been pretty much, damaged by the present Western diplomats. I mean, you have Blinken being the highest diplomat in the United States. Before that, you had other secretaries of state also, making it hard for diplomacy to breathe. And then you have Baerbock, not so successful in it either. So I think that diplomacy should be taking into account the interest of the other. Diplomacy should be finding a way, even if you have a very hopeless situation or a seemingly hopeless situation, it is the art of finding a new level on which a problem can be solved. And that means you have to know your partner, you have to know the history, the culture, you have to have a certain amount of sympathy for the other, because if you're not sympathetic, you cannot deal with it. And the problem with the present crop of diplomats, or most of them, is that they are so concerned with their own personality. They spend, in the case of Baerbock, she spends six-digit numbers of euros for photo and professional, makeup, and this is not diplomacy. This is PR. This is deception. This is everything but diplomacy. I think the art of diplomacy has a lot to do with statecraft. It has to do not only with the ability to form your own state to a vision, to make it better, to make it more creative, to more potential for its citizens, but to be generous for the other nations as well, and then have relations among nations and civilizations where each is acting in the interest of the other, or at least you have a way of solving things through creative ways of non-military means to resolve conflict. So I think that what is happening right now is the BRICS Plus at the BRICS Summit. I think it starts next week already. There will be the BRICS nations. 23 nations will have applied for membership already. 22 more have informally requested membership. There will be 70 nations present altogether. And I think that what these nations are trying to do is to exactly develop a new system of relations among each other based on the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence and based on the UN Charter, but all together treat each other with respect as equals. And that is something most of the politicians and diplomats in the West will have to learn again.
Now we have a question from Balkrishna, who's a participant in the International Peace Coalition. And this also gets to the question of diplomacy, given all the threats against China coming from the West about its so-called aggressive policy in the Indo-Pacific region. Balkrishna asks, what do you think of the policy of China in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, I think that China is, definitely regarding or watching out for its interest, because China is very much aware that all these games in the South Pacific is basically, designed to cause provocations all the time, like the so-called freedom of seafaring in the South China Sea, or now naturally the patrols around Taiwan, the weapon sales for Taiwan, the visits of the many politicians treating Taiwan as if it would be a separate nation. I mean, this is not a miracle to read that the aim is to contain China. So China is, basically investing a certain amount of its GDP in a military buildup. It's still way, way behind, let's say, the United States. So the talk about the military aggressiveness of China is ridiculous, because what China is doing is way, way, way less than what the United States and NATO are doing. Then the fact that NATO is deciding or wants to become global NATO, I mean, China has reacted very strongly against it, because they know perfectly well that the only aim of that is China. Also, what has the North Atlantic Alliance to do in the Pacific? It's just a provocative action. I think that the efforts to split Russia and India, China and India, all of that will, and especially in China and India, all of this will not work. I think there has been a tremendous effort to basically have doomsday saying for the coming BRICS conference, that all these tensions will mean that they cannot get an agreement, for example, on the question if the BRICS should be expanded or not. But all the leaders, I think Modi himself, President Lula, Russian spokesman, Chinese spokesman, they have all basically nixed that and said that such speculations are exactly that, that they are speculations and not the reality. So I think China overall is absolutely not aggressive. It's not imperialistic. If you look at the history of China, they have, not engaged in proselytizing their system. It's not part of the Chinese philosophy. And so therefore, I think that the good thing is that China does have an orientation to help to uplift the countries of the global South through economic development. And if you talk to African leaders and many people in Asia or Latin America, they will tell you that they regard China as a friend. And, that is their experience. And, that's a good thing.
Hello? I'm sorry, we're having a system problem here, but I was going to say we have.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, we have time for one more question, but before we get to that, I want to encourage people to go to the schillerinstitute.com website and sign up, register for the conference we have scheduled for September 9th. Okay, Helga, are you there? I'm sorry. We have one more question. Let me get it out quickly and you can answer this. Uh, it's from Menashe, who wants to know when you're talking about geopolitics, he asks, is this the divide and rule policy of the old imperial system? Is that what they're using to divide the African countries against Niger?
They're trying to very clearly, but it does not look like it's working. As you can see by the fact that the economic organization ECOWAS wanted to have a military operation against Niger, but they had to call it off indefinitely because they realized that, first of all, the stakes are extremely high. If they would have gone ahead with it, it was threatening to blow up the entire African continent. And, that would have had really unforeseeable consequences for everything, including, mass refugees and total collapse. So they had to call it off because several leaders of neighbor countries came out very strongly in defense of Niger's present policies. So I think that failed. I think the danger is naturally that other conflicts could be ignited. But I think the new factor in the situation is that the Africans really have, they say so publicly. If you read the African newspapers or you listen to African media otherwise, they are saying it. They say we have enough, we don't want these games anymore. And that's a completely new tone in the situation. And I think it's actually a very hopeful development that this can pursue.
And hopefully the people in the West will take the same attitude and join the Global South in ending the period of colonialism. Helga, thanks for your patience with the internet problems today. We'll be back again next week, and I assure you my internet connection will be better then. So until next week, we'll see you.
Okay, join the Schiller Institute.